So we left off when President McKinley asked Congress to declare war on Spain. So we know that they do. And I mentioned that President McKinley, has to ask them because Congress is the only entity with the power to declare war on another country. The president can't do that. That's Congress's job. So just like a bill, they have to talk about it, vote on it, and it has to pass both houses of Congress. Well, when we declared war on Spain, we also passed an amendment to that measure, and it's called the Teller Amendment, and it was written by this guy on the right, Henry Teller. So Henry Teller was a anti-imperialist, so he didn't want the United States to expanding their sphere of influence and power. There were a fair amount of anti-imperialists in the United States at this time, and he was worried, as were a lot of anti-imperialists, that we were just using we were using our problems here with Spain to just gain land in Cuba. So the Teller Amendment basically says that we are not getting involved in the Spanish-American War, that we're not fighting with Spain here to gain territory from Cuba. So we have no intentions of gaining any type of territory from Cuba. Now, he doesn't say that we're not trying to gain territory from Spain. He just says Cuba. So he's trying to close a problem here, but he sort of leaves some pretty significant loopholes in the way. So our Secretary of State at the time was this guy here on the left, Secretary John Hay, and John Hay called the Spanish-American War a splendid little war. And I know that sounds like a ridiculous thing to call a war because no war is splendid and no war is little. But John Hay had some pretty good reasons for giving it that nickname, which has lasted all of these years. The first is that this is a very short war. It was from April to August, so just sort of a summer fling, just very short. We had about 1 million volunteers from the United States serve in combat during the Spanish-American War. Only 500 of them were killed or wounded. So it is a very low number of casualties coming out of the Spanish-American War, when the last war we were in was the Civil War, with the highest number of casualties that we've ever had. And percentage-wise, still the highest number of casualties that we've ever had. So overall, it was not nearly as significant. That might be why a lot of you don't know much about the Spanish-American War. We also, getting into it, we win very quickly. As I've said, it was a short war, but we not only beat the Spanish in Cuba, we also beat the Spanish in in Puerto Rico and in the Philippines. So some of you might have seen like the Battle of Manila Bay. That was a battle in the Philippines. You might have seen that when you were researching for your project. So we really just sort of dominate altogether, which is why Secretary of State John Hay had such a sort of a good memory and vision of the war here. So, like I said, going into the war, we were automatically, really from the beginning, we were leading. In the beginning, we were at the very start, we were outnumbered. So the President McKinley asked for volunteers. He got 1 million very quickly. So we had no problem coming up with enough men to fight the Spanish. We did have a problem, however, supplying those men. Our uniforms were a lot thicker and heavier, and not something that you need in the tropical climate of Cuba. So we have to, come up with new uniforms for our boys. We also are reusing a lot of our recycling a lot of our military technology from the Civil War, because we're sort of low on supplies in that capacity as well. But it doesn't really matter. We're still going to be kicking some Spanish tail from the very beginning. We have a superior navy to the Spanish. Really, by May, we had destroyed the majority of the Spanish fleet. And that's gonna sort of set the tone for how the next few months are gonna go. Now, we were pretty surprised when we arrived in Cuba. Our people had never seen a Cuban before, and they were expecting to see white people. I guess if you haven't ever met anyone from Cuba, and you've never seen a real photograph, it would make sense as to why you wouldn't imagine them to be brown. So white people were just imagining more white people, and that is not what at all they found. They also were surprised to find that they weren't going to be fighting alongside organized and trained military. The Cubans were more guerrilla-style fighters, which actually ended up being very good. It's great to have tactics like that, especially when your enemy does not know the land or the environment as well as you do. But, of course, we're not really going to give the Cubans much credit for their role in the war because of racial prejudice, but they definitely do play a significant part. So, of the Spanish-American War, of all of our boys over there, we probably have the biggest reputation for the Rough Riders. So the Rough Riders were a cavalry unit. Cavalry means soldiers on horseback. So the Rough Riders were a cavalry unit in the Spanish-American War led by Teddy Roosevelt and Colonel Leonard Wood. So these two guys led this cavalry unit. It was a very diverse group of guys. We've got Ivy League grads and cowboys and sheriffs from small towns out west and Hispanic people and Native Americans. All sorts of people are in the Rough Riders unit. And they had this incredible reputation for bravery and resilience, and Teddy Roosevelt really makes a name for himself here. It's going to help to launch his political career. We know eventually he'll be president of the United States. So the Rough Riders had they're best known for the charge at Kettle Hill, which is part of the Battle of San Juan. So one of the reasons why that battle has such a significant reputation is I told you out of the 500, we lost 500 men in the war, killed or wounded. We lost 100 of them at that one particular battle. So as far as percentages go, that was a very bloody battle compared to the rest of the war for us. So, but nonetheless, they are victorious, but not because they got the job done. It's actually because of an African American unit that came in as backup, as reinforcements, and sort of finally handed the final blow over to the Spanish. But the African American unit does not really get the credit for that. We give the Rough Riders the credit for that. So closing in on the war, like I said, this is a very short war, only a few months. I told you we decimated most of the Spanish Navy in May. By July, mid-July, we basically finished it off. So a couple of weeks after that, they finally contacted the United States and asked for to begin some peace talks. So on April 12th, we signed an armistice with Spain. An armistice is basically a ceasefire while we begin working on formal treaty, like the points that each of us will, the formal demands of each country in a treaty. So in the armistice, we say, number one, we want you to give Cuba their independence immediately. Number two, we want the Puerto Rico and Guam. We want control over both of those places. And then number three, we want to allow our guys to remain in Manila Bay, which was in the Philippines, at least for the time being. We had won that battle, and we wanted our guys to stay there at least until we had decided what was going to happen with the Philippines. So we go to Paris in October of 98 to talk about terms for the treaty, and then what we come up with is the Treaty of Paris. And so we added in all of the armistice, demands, but on top of that, we changed our minds about Manila Bay. We said we don't just want Manila Bay, we actually want all of the Philippines. So we want control over Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. Now, the Spanish were not happy about this. They were losing 3 countries already, Cuba to their independence, Puerto Rico and Guam to the United States. They didn't want to lose a fourth, so they sort of hemmed and hawed and dragged their feet and took a really long time. Finally, in December, they came back with an answer, and they agreed that they would give us the Philippines if we paid $20 million. So $20 million in exchange for 3 countries, that's a pretty sweet deal. So we had no problem with that. So we come back to the United States with the Treaty of Paris, and just like the Declaration of War, the Treaty of Paris has to pass through Congress as well. And actually support for the treaty was very split. There was a lot of people who didn't like the treaty. They thought it was going to lead to a bunch of Filipinos coming into the United States, stealing our jobs. They thought that it would hurt sugarcane plantation owners because people start going to the more tropical places to grow sugarcane. They thought that it would lead to being invaded by an inferior race of all of these Filipino people. That they thought that some people thought we were violating the right to self-rule of these countries. So there's a mixed reasons as to why they didn't like the treaty, but there was a fair amount of people who did not support it, but it does end up passing Congress by 1 vote. So the Treaty of Paris does go into effect. So out of the Spanish-American War, we get Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. So pretty quickly, President McKinley starts working on a big military base in the Philippines, which is going to be our naval base in Manila Bay. And then in the year 1900, he is going to formally annex Hawaii. So now Hawaii is also a territory of the United States, and we grant citizenship to all of the people who live in Hawaii. Now he does this to strengthen the military base we have in Hawaii, which was Pearl Harbor. So we wanted to have Pearl Harbor, we wanted to be a little more secure about that and have control over the entire islands surrounding it. So that's why we finally end up annexing Hawaii. So now we have 4 territories belonging to the United States. So in a very short time period, we have vastly increased the power and influence of the United States. The military presence of the United States is larger than it has ever been. Our influence expands beyond the Western Hemisphere for the first time. So overall, this is a total win for imperialists. Anti-imperialists, on the other hand, are not happy about this at all. And then this is, they think, leading us down a pretty dangerous road.